The fluorescent lights buzz overhead in the cramped police station interview room as Detective Sarah Chen stares at the classified file marked Case 1982 to 0847, sealed. 40 years ago, her predecessor officer Mike Torino made an arrest that the department buried so deep even she wasn't supposed to know it existed. 3 suspects, a routine traffic stop. But when the lab results came back, everything changed forever. "They looked exactly like us," Torino's weathered voice crackles through the decades-old recording Chen just discovered. "Walked like us, talked like us. But the DNA, Jesus, the DNA showed they weren't even close to human." Now Chen holds the evidence that could expose the greatest cover-up in modern history. The suspects vanished from custody without explanation. The case files were classified beyond top secret. And Torino? He's been living in hiding ever since, waiting for someone brave enough to listen. But as Chen digs deeper, she realizes something terrifying. These beings didn't just visit in 1982, they're still here. And they're watching her every move. What happens when the truth about our planet's hidden visitors finally comes to light? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The manila folder crackles as Chen opens it wider, revealing photographs that shouldn't exist. 3 mugshots stare back at her, a woman with auburn hair and striking green eyes, a middle-aged man with graying temples, and a younger man who could pass for a college student. Their faces are unremarkable, forgettable even, the kind of people you'd pass on the street without a second glance. Chen's hands tremble slightly as she flips through the pages. The arrest report is standard enough, pulled over for a broken taillight on Highway 9 just outside Millbrook. Vehicle registration came back clean, but when Torino ran their IDs, the system flagged them as suspicious. No social security records, no birth certificates, no digital footprints of any kind. "Standard procedure," she whispers to herself, reading Torino's neat handwriting. "Brought them in for questioning." The next page makes her stomach drop. Laboratory results from the county coroner's office, dated 3 days after the arrest. Dr. Elizabeth Hawthorne's signature is scrawled at the bottom, but the content makes no sense. Genetic sequences that don't match any known human markers. Cellular structures that suggest adaptations to atmospheric conditions not found on Earth. Blood chemistry that indicates a physiology evolved under different gravitational forces. Chen pulls out her phone and searches for Dr. Hawthorne. The obituary is brief, died in a car accident 6 months after the arrests. The timing sends a chill down her spine. A soft knock interrupts her thoughts. Captain Morrison fills the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Working late again, Chen? Find anything interesting?" The question hangs in the air between them. Chen studies her superior's face, searching for tells. Morrison has been with the department for 35 years. He would have been here when this case broke. He would have known. "Nothing worth mentioning," she lies. Morrison nods slowly. "Good. Some cases are cold for a reason. Sometimes it's better to let sleeping dogs lie." He pauses at the threshold. "Have a good night, Detective. Drive safe." After he leaves, Chen waits 10 minutes before opening the file again. Her paranoia feels justified when she notices Morrison's patrol car still in the parking lot through the window. She photographs every page with her phone, uploads them to an encrypted cloud account, and tucks the original file back where she found it in the basement archives. The drive home takes her past Highway 9. Almost without conscious thought, she takes the exit and follows the old road into the hills. The arrest location is easy to find, a wide shoulder where the guardrail curves around a steep drop into Millbrook Valley. During the day, it probably offers scenic views. At night, it feels isolated and vulnerable. Chen parks and steps out, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. 40 years is a long time for evidence to survive, but something compels her to look. The beam reveals scattered debris, old bottle caps, cigarette butts, the usual detritus of passing traffic, but near the tree line, something glints. She kneels and brushes away decades of fallen leaves. Partially buried in the soil is a small metallic object, roughly triangular, with edges too precise to be natural. The material is unfamiliar, not quite metal, not quite ceramic. It's warm to the touch despite the cool night air. Back in her car, Chen examines the object under the dome light. Strange symbols are etched along its surface, forming patterns that hurt her eyes when she tries to focus on them. The warmth in her palm intensifies, and for a moment she swears she hears something, a low humming that seems to come from inside her head rather than her ears. Her phone buzzes. A text from an unknown number. You found it. Now you understand why we've been waiting. Chen's blood runs cold as she looks around the empty road. In her rearview mirror, 2 points of light approach from the distance. The coffee had gone cold hours ago, but I kept wrapping my fingers around the mug anyway. Dr. Sarah Chen sat across from me in the university's sterile interview room, her digital recorder between us like a small black confession booth. She'd been patient, letting me take my time, but I could see the anticipation burning behind her wire-rimmed glasses. "The call came in at 11:47 p.m., I began, my voice rustier than I'd expected. "Domestic disturbance on Maple Street. Nothing unusual about that. We got those calls 3-4 times a week back then. But this one..." I paused, remembering how the dispatcher's voice had trembled slightly. This one was different. Dr. Chen leaned forward. "Different how?" The caller hung up mid-sentence, just cut off while describing what she was seeing. When we tried calling back, the line was dead. Not busy, dead, like the phone had been destroyed. I closed my eyes and let myself drift back to that October night. The leaves had been turning, and there was that sharp bite in the air that promised winter wasn't far behind. My partner Jake Moreau and I had been working together for 6 years by then. Good cop Jake, methodical, never jumped to conclusions. We pulled up to 1247 Maple at 12:18 a.m. Victorian house, well-maintained, porch light on. Everything looked normal except for one thing. Every window in the neighborhood was glowing blue, not from TVs or computer screens. This was different, pulsing, like a heartbeat made of light. Dr. Chen's pen had stopped moving. "You mean the entire neighborhood?" "Every single house for 3 blocks in each direction. But here's the thing. When we got out of the patrol car, the blue light just stopped, like someone had flipped a switch. Suddenly it was just a normal suburban street at midnight. I remember Jake and I exchanging glances over the roof of our Crown Victoria. We'd both seen it, but neither of us wanted to be the first to mention something that impossible. Police training teaches you to trust your observations, but it also teaches you to be skeptical of anything that doesn't fit the pattern of normal human behavior. We approached the front door. Standard procedure. Jake took the left side, I took the right. But before we could knock, the door opened. A woman stood there, mid-30s, blonde hair, wearing a blue dress that looked like it belonged in the 1950s. She was beautiful in a way that made your brain itch, if that makes sense. Perfect, but too perfect. Like someone had designed her based on a description of what humans should look like. What did she say? Nothing at first. She just stared at us with these pale green eyes, tilting her head like she was listening to something we couldn't hear. Then she smiled, and I swear to God, Dr. Chen, that smile had too many teeth. Not bigger teeth, just more of them than there should have been. I took a shaky sip of the cold coffee, buying myself a moment. Even now, 4 decades later, remembering her face made my skin crawl. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was wrong too, like an echo of an echo. She said, "Officers, you're just in time. We were hoping you'd arrive," before the transition completed. Before we could ask what she meant by that, 2 men appeared behind her in the doorway. Same impossible perfection, same unsettling quality. They moved in perfect synchronization, like dancers who rehearsed their routine 1,000 times. "Did you feel threatened?" The woman had introduced herself as Margaret, and the men as Robert and Thomas. No last names. They claimed to be siblings visiting from out of town, said there had been a misunderstanding with a neighbor about noise. Everything they said was reasonable, logical, the kind of explanation that should have sent us back to our patrol car with a standard report filed and forgotten. But their eyes never blinked. Not once during the entire conversation. And when they breathed, it was perfectly synchronized, like they were sharing the same set of lungs. Jake started asking routine questions, names, addresses, identification. Margaret reached into her purse and handed him 3 driver's licenses. Illinois plates. Everything looked legitimate, until Jake ran them through our system. The names came back clean, but the birth dates... I shook my head. All 3 licenses showed they'd been born on the same day, same year, same hospital. October 15th, 1952. Siblings born on the same day isn't impossible. No, but it is when they all looked like they were in their 30s. And this was 1983. According to their IDs, they should have been 31 years old. Dr. Chen, I'm telling you, those 3 people hadn't aged a day past 25. The lab results arrived on a Tuesday morning that felt like any other, until Detective Sarah Chen walked into my office with a manila folder and the strangest expression I'd ever seen on her face. She'd been my partner for 3 years by then, and I'd seen her handle everything from domestic violence calls to gang shootings without so much as flinching. But that morning, her hands were actually trembling. "Mike, we need to talk," she said, closing the door behind her and drawing the blinds. "About those 3 from the warehouse." I looked up from my coffee and the incident reports I'd been reviewing. The trio had been processed and transferred to county holding 2 days prior, awaiting arraignment. Standard procedure for breaking and entering, though their complete lack of identification remained puzzling. No fingerprints in the system, no missing persons reports that matched their descriptions, nothing. What about them? Sarah sat down across from my desk and opened the folder. I could see several laboratory documents inside, official letterhead from the State Forensics Division. The DNA results came back, and... She hesitated, glancing toward the door as if someone might be listening. "Mike, I've run these tests 3 times. I had them send samples to 2 different labs. The results are consistent across all analyses." I set down my coffee mug. Something in her tone was making the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Just tell me what they found." "The DNA is human," she said slowly. "But it's wrong." "What do you mean, wrong?" Sarah pulled out the first document and spread it across my desk. The page was covered in genetic sequences and technical jargon that meant nothing to me, but I could see several sections highlighted in yellow. Human beings have 23 pairs of chromosomes. Every human being, no exceptions. These 3 individuals have 24 pairs. I stared at the papers, trying to process what she was telling me. "That's impossible." That's what I thought. So I called Dr. Martinez at the state lab directly. Sarah's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Mike, he's been doing this for 15 years. He said he's never seen anything like it. The extra chromosome pair isn't random genetic material either. It's organized, complex, like it serves a specific function." My mouth felt dry. Could it be some kind of mutation or a lab error? 3 different people with the exact same extra chromosome pair? The statistical probability is essentially 0. She pulled out another document. "And there's more. Their blood work shows cellular activity unlike anything in the medical literature. Enhanced immune system markers, accelerated healing factors, brain chemistry that suggests cognitive capabilities well beyond normal human ranges." I leaned back in my chair, feeling like the ground was shifting beneath me. "You're telling me these people aren't human?" "I'm telling you they're more than human, or maybe what humans could become." Sarah gathered the papers back into the folder. "The question is, where did they come from? And what were they really doing in that warehouse?" "I want to talk to them again," I said. Sarah shook her head. "That's the other problem. They're gone." "Gone? What do you mean, gone?" "I called county this morning to arrange interviews. According to their records, all 3 were released yesterday afternoon. Charges dropped due to insufficient evidence. I felt ice forming in my stomach. I never authorized dropping any charges. Neither did the prosecutor's office. When I pressed the desk sergeant, he got defensive. said the release order came from downtown. But when I called downtown, nobody knew anything about it. I was already reaching for my phone. Get me the county jail on the line. 20 minutes of phone calls later, the picture became even more disturbing. The release paperwork existed, properly signed and filed, but nobody could explain who had authorized it or how the decision had been made. Security footage from the jail showed the 3 suspects leaving through the main entrance at 2:17 p.m. the previous day, but there was no record of anyone coming to collect them. They had simply walked out. "Mike," Sarah said as I hung up from my final call, "there's something else. I drove by the warehouse this morning. It's empty. All that equipment, everything we saw that night, it's gone." I sat in silence for a long moment, staring at the folder containing DNA results that shouldn't exist for people who were no longer in custody. Whatever we had stumbled into that night was bigger than a simple breaking and entering case. Much bigger, and I was beginning to suspect that someone very powerful wanted it to stay buried. The silence in my kitchen stretched so long I could hear the refrigerator's hum and the distant tick of the grandfather clock my wife had loved. Sarah's pen hovered over her notepad, and I could see the questions burning behind her eyes. But some stories need to unfold like origami, one careful fold at a time, or the whole thing tears apart. "The blood work came back 3 days later," I continued, my coffee now cold in my hands. "Dr. Martinez called me personally, said he needed to see me right away and that I shouldn't discuss the results with anyone until we talked." I'd never heard fear in Martinez's voice before. The man had performed autopsies on victims of the worst crimes our city had to offer, had seen things that would break most people. But that Tuesday morning, his voice shook like a leaf in a hurricane. I drove to the lab instead of having him come to the station. Looking back, that probably saved both our careers, maybe our lives. I paused, remembering the weight of that manila envelope in Martinez's trembling hands. He led me to his private office, locked the door, and drew the blinds. Then he showed me something that shouldn't exist. The test results were spread across his desk like accusations. Blood type, protein markers, chromosomal analysis, all the standard work. But there were additional pages, covered in notes written in Martinez's careful handwriting. Notes that made no sense. "Frank," he said to me, "in 30 years of forensic work, I've never seen anything like this. I ran the tests 3 times, used different samples, even brought in equipment from the university." His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the papers. Sarah leaned forward. "What did the tests show?" The 3 suspects had blood that was almost human. Almost. But there were proteins present that don't exist in any known terrestrial organism. Their red blood cells were slightly larger than normal, with a different oxygen-carrying capacity, and their white blood cells— I stopped, remembering Martinez's ashen face. Their white blood cells had structures that looked almost mechanical under electron microscopy. I stood up, needing to move, to pace. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, too confining. Through the window, I watched Mrs. Chen walking her dog, living in a world where the strangest thing she'd encounter today might be finding out the grocery store was out of her favorite tea. Martinez wanted to publish the findings. Can you imagine? A respected forensic scientist presenting evidence that we'd arrested 3 beings that weren't entirely human. I convinced him to wait, told him we needed to be absolutely certain. But before we could decide what to do next, everything went to hell. The memory of that phone call still made my stomach clench. Martinez, frantic, calling me at 2 in the morning. Someone broke into his lab that night. It wasn't random vandalism or theft. Whoever did it knew exactly what they were looking for. They took every sample, every test result, every photograph. Even the backup files on his computer were wiped clean. Professional work. I shook my head. He was old school, kept everything in his lab or on his work computer. The only evidence left was what we both remembered, and even that seemed impossible to believe without the physical proof. What I didn't tell Sarah was about the men in dark suits who visited Martinez the next day. how they identified themselves with badges that looked official but somehow felt wrong, how they asked very specific questions about the blood work from a case involving 3 suspects arrested downtown, how Martinez called me afterward, his voice barely a whisper, saying he'd told them everything had been routine, normal, nothing unusual at all. The case against our 3 suspects fell apart within a week, I continued. The prosecutor said there wasn't enough evidence to proceed. The assault charges were dropped. The victims suddenly refused to testify, and the 3 of them walked free, like nothing had ever happened. Did you try to follow up, track them down? For months, I looked for them, checked every hotel, every rental property, every place someone might stay in this city. It was like they'd vanished into thin air, no credit card records, no paper trail, nothing. The only proof they'd ever existed was the booking records, and even those seemed to disappear from various databases over time. Sarah's pen had stopped moving entirely. She was staring at me with the kind of expression I'd seen on the faces of rookie officers the first time they encountered, something that couldn't be explained by training or experience. Martinez retired early, moved to Florida. We stayed in touch for a while, but neither of us ever spoke about that night again. Not until now. I met Sarah's eyes. He died last year. Heart attack. The unspoken question hung between us like smoke. Was it really a heart attack, or had someone decided that loose ends needed to be tied up permanently? The morning sun filtered through the dusty blinds of my study, casting long shadows across the scattered files and photographs that had consumed my last 3 sleepless nights. I'd been staring at the same document for 20 minutes, my coffee growing cold as the implications of what I'd discovered settled into my bones like winter frost. The DNA analysis from 1984 hadn't just shown anomalies. It had revealed something that defied every textbook, every scientific paper, every assumption about human evolution I'd ever encountered. The 3 suspects we'd arrested that night weren't just different, they were impossible. According to Dr. Sarah Chen's initial report, their genetic markers contained sequences that shouldn't exist. Not variations of human DNA, not mutations or genetic disorders, but entirely foreign coding that resembled nothing in any terrestrial database. Even more disturbing was the note she'd scribbled in the margin, recommend immediate federal involvement. This exceeds local jurisdiction capabilities. That recommendation had been ignored, or rather, it had been buried so deep that even Chen herself seemed to forget she'd made it. I reached for the phone, my arthritis making my fingers stiff as I dialed the number I'd memorized decades ago. It rang 4 times before a familiar voice answered. Martinez. Tony, it's Frank Kowalski. A pause. Jesus, Frank. It's been, what, 15 years? How the hell are you? I need to ask you about something from the old days. Something sensitive. The warmth in his voice cooled instantly. Tony Martinez had been my partner for 12 years before I retired, and he knew my tone well enough to recognize when I was walking into dangerous territory. What kind of sensitive? The night we brought in those 3 from the warehouse district. October 1984. You remember? Silence stretched between us like a taut wire. When Tony finally spoke, his voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. Frank, you know I can't talk about that. Can't or won't? Both. Some stones are better left unturned. They killed Chen, Tony. Made it look like an accident, but they killed her because of what she found. Another long pause. I could hear him breathing, could practically feel him wrestling with whatever oath or threat had kept him quiet all these years. Meet me at Roselli's in an hour. Come alone, and Frank, make sure nobody follows you. The line went dead. Roselli's diner occupied a forgotten corner of the old industrial district, the kind of place where conversations disappeared into the clatter of dishes and the hiss of the grill. Tony was already there when I arrived, hunched over a cup of coffee in the back booth, his once dark hair now silver and his face marked by lines that spoke of too many sleepless nights. You look like hell, he said, as I slid into the opposite seat. The waitress approached, but Tony waved her away with a gesture that suggested he wanted absolute privacy. When she was gone, he leaned forward, his voice barely audible above the ambient noise. "They came to see me 3 days after we filed that report. Federal agents, but not FBI or DEA or anyone else I recognized. They had credentials that checked out, but something felt wrong about them. Too clean, too coordinated. They knew things about the case that weren't in any report. What did they want? For us to forget. They said the suspects had been transferred to federal custody for national security reasons and that any discussion of the case would constitute treason. They showed me photographs of my family, Frank. My kids walking to school, my wife at the grocery store. They didn't have to spell out the threat. I felt a chill run down my spine. Did you ever see the DNA results?" Tony shook his head. "Chen tried to show me something the day before she died, but I was too scared. After what those agents had told me, I didn't want to know. I thought if I stayed ignorant, if I kept my mouth shut, my family would be safe. And were they? My daughter Sarah died in a car accident in 1987. Single vehicle collision on a dry road with perfect visibility. The investigating officer found no mechanical problems, no evidence of impairment. Just a tragic accident." His hands trembled as he reached for his coffee. "My son Michael developed a rare form of cancer 2 years later. Survived, thankfully, but the doctors said they'd never seen anything quite like it. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. Chen's death, the disappeared evidence, the systematic intimidation of everyone connected to the case. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to bury what we'd discovered that night. Tony, I need you to tell me everything you remember about those 3 suspects." "Everything." He looked around the diner nervously, then back at me. "Why now, Frank? After all these years, why are you digging this up?" "Because I think they're back." The laboratory grew silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Dr. Sarah Chen stared at the computer screen, her coffee growing cold as the implications of what she was seeing began to crystallize. The DNA sequencing had run 3 times now, each iteration confirming what should have been impossible. "Tom," she called softly, not taking her eyes off the monitor. "You need to see this." Detective Morrison approached slowly, his weathered hands gripping the back of her chair. The past week had aged him visibly. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usual confident demeanor had given way to something more fragile, more uncertain. "The mitochondrial DNA," Sarah began, highlighting sections of the genetic code with her cursor. "It's unlike anything in our databases. But that's not the strangest part." She pulled up a comparison chart. "Look at the telomeres." Morrison squinted at the screen. "In layman's terms, Doc, telomeres are like protective caps on chromosomes. They shorten as we age, which is why we can estimate someone's biological age from their DNA." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "These 3 suspects? Their telomeres suggest they're over 200 years old." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Morrison's grip tightened on the chair until his knuckles went white. "That's impossible," he said finally. "That's what I thought. But there's more." Sarah opened another file. "I found cellular structures that don't exist in human biology. They're integrated so seamlessly into the DNA that at first glance they look like standard genetic material. But under deeper analysis—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Tom, these aren't mutations or abnormalities. They're engineered." Morrison stepped back from the computer as if it had shocked him. The fluorescent lights seemed to flicker, casting strange shadows across his face. "Engineered by whom?" Sarah shrugged helplessly. "That's the question that's been keeping me awake. The precision is beyond our current capabilities. The integration is perfect. No signs of grafting or artificial insertion. It's as if these modifications were part of the original genetic blueprint." A soft knock interrupted them. Officer Janet Reeves stood in the doorway, her face pale and drawn. "Detective Morrison, we have a problem." Morrison and Sarah exchanged glances before following Reeves down the corridor to the holding cells. The familiar sounds of the police station, ringing phones, typing keyboards, muffled conversations, seemed distant and surreal. The three suspects sat exactly as they had for the past week. Same positions, same calm expressions, same unsettling stillness. But something was different. Morrison focused on the first suspect, the woman with the striking blue eyes. Her chest rose and fell, but the intervals were wrong. Too long between breaths, too controlled. "How long has this been going on?" he asked. "I noticed it this morning during the shift change. At first I thought they were sleeping, but their eyes are open. They're responsive if you speak to them, but otherwise—" Reeves trailed off. Sarah approached the cell cautiously. "Excuse me?" she called out. "Can you hear me?" The woman's head turned slowly, mechanically, until her gaze fixed on Sarah. "We hear you." The response came not just from the woman, but from all three suspects simultaneously. The exact same words in perfect unison with identical intonation. Morrison felt the hair on his arms stand up. In 40 years of police work, he had encountered every variety of criminal behavior, every form of psychological manipulation. This was something else entirely. "We hear you," they repeated, their voices creating an eerie harmony that seemed to resonate through the concrete walls. Sarah backed away from the cell, her face ashen. "This isn't possible. There's no way they could coordinate like that without some form of communication." But Morrison was studying their eyes more carefully now. The blue irises seemed to shimmer with an inner light, almost imperceptible unless you knew to look for it. A faint, rhythmic pulsing that matched no human biological function he had ever observed. "Doc," he said quietly, "I need you to run one more test." "What kind of test?" Morrison continued staring at the suspects, his mind racing through possibilities he didn't want to consider. "Brain scans. I want to know what's happening inside their heads." The three figures remained motionless, but Morrison could swear he detected the faintest hint of a smile on their lips, as if they had been waiting for him to ask exactly that question. As they prepared to leave, the woman spoke again, her voice carrying an odd cadence that seemed almost musical. "Detective Morrison," she said, and this time she spoke alone. "Time grows short. The others will come soon." Morrison froze. What others? But the suspects had already returned to their unnatural stillness, their breathing once again falling into that impossible, synchronized rhythm that defied every law of human biology. The DNA results arrived on a Tuesday morning that would forever divide my life into before and after. I'd been counting down the days since we'd sent the samples to the state lab, my sleep growing more restless with each passing night. When Detective Morrison knocked on my office door, his face was the color of old parchment. "You need to see this, Frank," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And we need to talk somewhere private." We drove to Millfield Park in silence, Morrison clutching a manila envelope like it contained nuclear secrets. Maybe it did. The park was empty except for a few joggers, their footfalls echoing off the wet pavement from the previous night's rain. We found a bench overlooking the lake, far from any ears that might be listening. Morrison's hands trembled as he opened the envelope. "I've been a cop for 22 years, he began, "and I've never seen anything like this. Hell, I don't think anyone has." He pulled out 3 separate reports, each stamped with the state laboratory's official seal. The technical language was dense, full of genetic terminology that might as well have been written in Sanskrit, but even I could understand the conclusions that had been highlighted in yellow. "Their base DNA structure," Morrison read, his voice catching, "shows significant variations from standard human genetic markers. Presence of unknown protein sequences. Cellular mitochondria displaying non-terrestrial characteristics. Non-terrestrial. The word hung between us like a loaded gun. "There's more," he continued. "The lab ran the tests 3 times, thinking they'd made an error. They brought in specialists from the university. Everyone reached the same conclusion." He looked up from the papers, his eyes wide with something between fear and wonder. "Frank, these people, they're not entirely human." I felt the world tilt beneath me. In my 30 years on the force, I'd investigated murders that would make your skin crawl, corruption that reached the highest levels of city government, cases that challenged everything I thought I knew about human nature. But this? This was different. This rewrote the rules of existence itself. "What exactly are you saying?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "I'm saying that the 3 suspects we arrested aren't from here. Their genetic makeup suggests they're either an unknown subspecies of human or—" He paused, unable to finish the sentence. "Or what, Morrison? Or there's something else entirely, something that evolved somewhere else." The implications crashed over me like a tsunami. If these 3 individuals weren't human, what were they? How many others like them existed? How long had they been here? And most terrifying of all, what did they want? I thought back to that night at the warehouse, remembering details I'd initially dismissed, the way they'd moved in perfect synchronization, how none of them had seemed surprised or panicked when we'd burst through the door, their calm acceptance of arrest, as if it had been expected, planned for. My mind raced. Were we dealing with some kind of advanced beings who'd found a way to blend in with human society? Were they scouts, refugees, invaders conducting reconnaissance? "Who else knows about this?" I asked. "Just you, me, and the lab technicians. But Frank, we can't keep this quiet much longer. The lab director is asking questions. He wants to bring in federal authorities, maybe the CDC. The thought of federal involvement sent a chill down my spine. Once this information left our small circle, it would spiral out of our control. The suspects would disappear into some black site facility, never to be seen again. The truth would be buried under layers of classification and denial. "We need to interview them again," I said, "before anyone else gets involved. We need answers." Morrison nodded grimly. "I've already arranged it. Tomorrow morning before the day shift arrives. But Frank," he leaned closer, lowering his voice even though we were alone, "what if they're dangerous? What if this is just the beginning of something bigger?" I stared out at the lake, watching ducks glide across the dark water, their movements creating ripples that spread outward in ever-widening circles. Like truth, I thought. Once released, it touches everything. "Then we deal with it," I said finally. "But first, we find out what we're really dealing with." As we drove back to the station, the DNA report secure in Morrison's envelope, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were standing at the edge of a precipice. Tomorrow's interview would either provide answers or push us over the edge into an abyss from which there might be no return. The quiet suburban streets we passed looked different now, transformed by knowledge into something uncertain and potentially dangerous. How many other secrets were hiding behind those normal-looking houses and familiar faces? The fluorescent lights in the lab hummed with an electrical urgency that seemed to match the tension crackling through the air. Dr. Sarah Chen stood frozen over her microscope, her hands trembling as she adjusted the focus for the 5th time. What she was seeing defied every principle of biology she'd learned in her 23 years of genetic research. "This can't be right," she whispered, stepping back from the equipment. The blood samples Detective Morrison had brought her 3 days ago contained cellular structures that shouldn't exist in any terrestrial organism. Morrison watched her from across the sterile room, his weathered face etched with concern. He'd known Sarah since she was a graduate student, had consulted with her on dozens of cases over the years. He'd never seen her look so shaken. "What are you seeing, Doc?" Sarah pulled off her latex gloves with sharp, nervous movements. "The DNA sequences they're not entirely human, Jack. But they're not animal either. There are protein structures I've never encountered, amino acid chains that don't follow normal patterns." She paused, running her fingers through her graying hair. "It's as if someone took human DNA and spliced it with something completely foreign." Morrison felt his stomach drop. After 40 years on the force, he thought he'd seen everything. But the 3 suspects they'd brought in that night had unsettled him in ways he couldn't articulate. Their movements had been too fluid, their responses too coordinated, and their eyes, Christ, their eyes had seemed to reflect light like an animal's. Could it be some kind of genetic modification, experimental stuff? That's what I thought initially. Sarah moved to her computer, pulling up complex genetic mapping software. But look at this. The screen filled with spiraling DNA helixes, color-coded segments highlighting differences from baseline human samples. These variations aren't artificial insertions. They're integrated at the cellular level, part of the fundamental genetic structure. This would require technology decades beyond anything we currently possess. Morrison stepped closer to the screen, studying the alien patterns. What about the physical examination? Did you find anything else unusual? Sarah's expression grew even more troubled. That's where it gets really strange. Bone density is 40% higher than normal. Muscle fiber composition shows enhanced fast-twitch development. And their nervous system. She trailed off, clearly struggling with what she'd discovered. Their nervous system what, Sarah? Neural pathway efficiency is off the charts. Their brains process information at rates that should be impossible given normal human architecture. It's like they're operating with upgraded hardware. Morrison thought back to the interrogation room, how the three suspects had seemed to communicate without speaking, their movements synchronized in subtle ways that had made his skin crawl. Could they be some kind of hybrids? Human something else? Morrison had been dreading this moment. The official report listed the three suspects as persons of interest in a series of break-ins, but that was far from the complete truth. We picked them up near the old Blackwood research facility. You remember that place? Closed down in '82 after the government pulled their funding. The Blackwood site? Sarah's eyes widened. They were conducting classified genetic research there. Rumor was they were working on enhancement projects for the military. More than rumors, apparently. Morrison pulled out a manila folder he'd been carrying. I did some digging after we brought them in. Blackwood wasn't just doing enhancement research. They were investigating reports of unusual biological specimens recovered from various locations around the country, things that defied classification. Sarah opened the folder and immediately paled. Inside were declassified documents detailing the recovery of organic material from crash sites, tissue samples that showed non-human characteristics, and research notes describing attempts to integrate foreign genetic material with human subjects. My God, Jack, are you suggesting these three are the result of some kind of hybridization experiment? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm telling you what I've pieced together. Blackwood was shut down because their experiments went beyond what anyone was comfortable with, but maybe they succeeded before the plug was pulled. Sarah stared at the documents, her scientific mind racing through the implications. If this is real, if they actually managed to create human-alien hybrids, then these three individuals aren't just medical anomalies. They're proof that we're not alone in the universe. Morrison nodded grimly. And that someone's been trying to keep that information buried for 40 years. The lab fell silent except for the steady hum of equipment. Both of them understood that they were standing at a crossroads that would change everything, not just for them, but potentially for all of humanity. The question now was whether they were brave enough to follow the evidence wherever it might lead. The basement laboratory beneath the university's biology department felt like descending into another world. Dr. Sarah Chen led me through a maze of humming equipment and sterile workstations, her footsteps echoing against concrete walls that seemed to absorb sound rather than reflect it. The air carried the sharp scent of chemicals and something else, something organic that made my stomach turn. The samples you provided changed everything, she said, stopping beside a massive freezer unit lined with specimen containers. But before I show you what we found, I need you to understand that what you're about to see violates every principle of human biology we've established over centuries of research. I watched her pull on latex gloves with practiced precision. 40 years ago, I'd done the same thing when I first handled the evidence from that night. Now, seeing those familiar motions, my hands began to tremble with muscle memory I'd tried to forget. The DNA sequencing took months, Sarah continued, retrieving a sealed container. We ran the tests 17 times because the results seemed impossible. The cellular structure, the genetic markers, the chromosomal patterns, they're human, but they're also something else entirely. She placed the container under a microscope and gestured for me to look. Through the lens I saw what appeared to be normal human cells, but as she adjusted the focus, peculiar formations became visible within the cellular walls. They looked almost crystalline, geometric patterns that pulsed with their own internal light. These structures don't exist in terrestrial biology, Sarah explained. They're integrated into the DNA itself, not parasitic or foreign, but fundamental to the organism's genetic code. It's as if someone took human DNA and rewrote it with additional instructions we can't decipher. The implications hit me like a physical blow. I'd carried the weight of that night for 4 decades, but seeing proof that my suspicions were correct somehow made it worse, not better. Those 3 suspects hadn't been human, at least not entirely. "There's more," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a whisper. She led me to another workstation where computer screens displayed complex genetic sequences. We compared the samples to every known human population database. The closest matches aren't from any current ethnic group or geographical region. They're from archaeological DNA samples, specimens that are thousands of years old. My mouth went dry. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying these individuals carry genetic markers from ancient human populations that supposedly went extinct millennia ago. But it's not just that they share some common ancestry. It's like they're direct descendants, unchanged by the evolutionary pressures that affected the rest of humanity." She pulled up another screen showing a 3-dimensional model of DNA helix, but this one had additional strands weaving through it like golden threads. The extra genetic material appears to be artificial, engineered. Someone or something modified these bloodlines long ago and kept them isolated, preserved. The room felt like it was spinning. I gripped the edge of the workstation to steady myself. Preserved for what purpose? That's what we've been trying to determine. The modifications seem to enhance certain cellular functions, improved healing, extended lifespan, enhanced cognitive processing. But there's something else. Something we can't quite understand yet. Sarah opened another container and showed me a tissue sample under ultraviolet light. The specimen glowed with an eerie blue-green phosphorescence that pulsed in regular intervals, like a heartbeat made of light. "The cells respond to specific electromagnetic frequencies," she explained. "They seem designed to receive and transmit information, almost like biological radio transmitters. We've detected faint signals emanating from the samples, but we can't decode them." A chill ran down my spine as I remembered the strange humming sound I'd heard that night in the interrogation room, the frequency that had made my teeth ache and my vision blur. Now I wondered if that sound had been some form of communication I wasn't equipped to understand. "Dr. Chen, have you shared these findings with anyone else?" Her expression darkened. "We tried to publish our preliminary results 6 months ago. The journal rejected them without peer review, claiming the data was fabricated. Then our funding was cut. The university claims budget constraints, but other departments received increases. Who else knows about this?" "Just my research team, but 3 of them have already transferred to other institutions. One moved across the country overnight without explanation. Another simply stopped coming to work and won't return my calls." The familiar pattern of suppression and intimidation sent ice through my veins. Someone was actively working to bury this information, just as they'd buried the truth about that night 40 years ago. But now, the evidence was undeniable, preserved in cellular structures that couldn't be explained away or dismissed. "Dr. Chen, I need copies of everything. All the test results, genetic sequences, photographs. Can you do that?" She nodded, already moving toward a computer terminal. "Detective Morrison, what really happened that night? What did you encounter?" I watched her fingers fly across the keyboard, downloading years of research onto encrypted drives. Something that was never supposed to be found. The laboratory's fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Dr. Sarah Chen spread the latest test results across the metal table. Frank Martinez stood beside her, his weathered hands gripping the edge so tightly his knuckles had gone white. 40 years of keeping this secret had aged him beyond his 73 years, but seeing the DNA analysis laid out in black and white made his chest tighten with a mixture of vindication and terror. "The mitochondrial patterns are unlike anything in our databases," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The base pairs follow our genetic code, but there are additional sequences, entire chromosomes that shouldn't exist in Homo sapiens." Frank stared at the complex charts and graphs, remembering that night in 1984 when he'd first laid eyes on the three suspects. They'd looked so ordinary sitting in those holding cells, just three people caught breaking into the Meridian Research Facility. But their eyes, there had been something about their eyes that made his skin crawl. "What does it mean?" he asked, though part of him already knew the answer would change everything. Sarah pulled out a magnifying glass and pointed to a specific sequence. "These genetic markers suggest a common ancestor, but one that diverged from human evolution approximately 50,000 years ago. The cellular structure is more efficient, the neural pathways more complex. Frank, these samples you gave me, they're not entirely human." The room fell silent except for the steady hum of the refrigeration units storing biological samples. Frank remembered Detective Morrison's face when the first DNA results had come back decades ago, how the man had gone pale and immediately made phone calls to people Frank had never heard of. Within 24 hours, the case had been classified, the suspects transferred, and Frank had been sworn to silence with threats that still haunted him. "There's something else," Sarah continued, pulling out another set of documents. "I ran the samples through the Federal Missing Persons database, cross-referencing with cold cases. I found matches. Frank's blood ran cold." "Matches?" "Genetic profiles from unsolved disappearances dating back to the 1960s. People who vanished without a trace, leaving behind only trace amounts of biological evidence. The DNA signatures are similar to your three suspects, but not identical. It's as if they're all part of the same extended family." The implications hit Frank like a physical blow. He sank into a nearby chair, his mind racing through decades of suppressed memories. The way the suspects had moved in perfect synchronization when they thought no one was watching. How they'd known details about the research facility's layout that hadn't been made public. The strange marks on their bodies that the medical examiner had dismissed as unusual birthmarks. "How many matches?" he asked. 17 confirmed cases across 6 states. All missing persons, all unsolved. The most recent was 3 months ago, a family of 4 from Oregon who disappeared during a camping trip. Frank's hands trembled as he reached for his coffee cup. The liquid had long since gone cold, but he needed something to ground him in reality. "Sarah, what if these people, these beings, what if they've been living among us all along?" She nodded grimly. "The genetic diversity suggests multiple generations. This isn't some recent phenomenon, Frank. This is organized, systematic, and it's been happening for decades." The weight of his silence suddenly felt crushing. 40 years of keeping quiet while people disappeared, while families mourned loved ones who might still be alive somewhere. Frank thought about his own family, his grandchildren, and wondered how many other law enforcement officials had been bought off or threatened into silence. "The research facility they broke into," Sarah said, interrupting his thoughts. "What were they studying there?" "Genetic engineering, advanced biotechnology. At least, that's what the public report said. The classified details were above my pay grade, even back then." Sarah's expression darkened. What if they weren't breaking in? What if they were trying to break someone out? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Frank remembered the strange equipment found in the suspect's possession, devices that looked almost organic, with smooth surfaces that seemed to shift and pulse under examination. The FBI had confiscated everything within hours, leaving local law enforcement with sanitized reports and non-disclosure agreements. "I need to see the case files again," Frank said, standing abruptly. "Everything, the evidence photos, witness statements, medical reports, all of it. Frank, If what we're dealing with is as big as I think it is, reopening this case could put us both in danger. He met her eyes, seeing his own determination reflected there. Sarah, people are still disappearing. Families are still being destroyed. I kept quiet for 40 years because I was scared, because I was told it was for national security. But what if our silence is exactly what they've been counting on? Outside the laboratory windows, the city sprawled endlessly under an overcast sky. Somewhere in that maze of buildings and lives, Frank realized, the truth was waiting. The question was whether they were brave enough to find it before it found them. The fluorescent lights in Detective Morrison's basement office flickered as he spread the classified files across his desk like tarot cards, revealing an unwanted future. 48 hours had passed since Frank's revelation, and the world hadn't ended yet. But Morrison could feel the tremors starting, small cracks in the foundation of everything humanity thought it knew about itself. His secure phone buzzed. Director Chen's voice cut through the static like a scalpel. "We have a problem, Morrison. 3 more incidents. Phoenix, Denver, and Portland. Same pattern. Individuals with impossible DNA markers, all claiming they don't know what they are." Morrison's blood chilled. How many total? 17 confirmed cases in the past week. The lab results keep coming back with the same anomalies Frank described. Non-human markers, but not matching any known terrestrial species. We're looking at something that shouldn't exist. Through his basement window, Morrison watched ordinary people walking their dogs, checking mail, living their blissfully ignorant lives. He wondered how many of them carried secrets buried in their genetic code. "There's something else," Chen continued. "We ran deep background checks on all 17 individuals. They share certain characteristics, all adopted, all have gaps in their early childhood memories, and all were found as infants under mysterious circumstances between 1952 and 1987. The pattern hit Morrison like a physical blow. They're not random occurrences, no, they're deliberate placements. Someone or something has been seeding these individuals into our population for decades." Morrison thought of Frank's 3 suspects, how normal they'd seemed until the moment everything changed. Have any of them exhibited unusual abilities? Define unusual. Chen's laugh held no humor. The woman in Phoenix survived a car crash that should have killed her instantly, walked away without a scratch while the vehicle was completely destroyed. The man in Denver was found at the bottom of a frozen lake. He'd been underwater for 6 hours but showed no signs of hypothermia or oxygen deprivation. Jesus Christ. It gets worse. We've been monitoring their communications since we identified them. They're not trying to contact each other, Morrison. Someone else is reaching out to them. Coded messages through social media, classified ads, even song requests on radio stations. Someone knows what they are and is activating them. The basement suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in. Morrison loosened his tie, struggling to process the implications. Activating them for what? That's what we need to find out. I'm forming a special task force. Off the books, minimal personnel. Given your history with the original case, I want you leading it. I'm retired, Chen. The world might be ending, Morrison. This isn't the time for retirement. Through the phone, Morrison heard papers shuffling, the background hum of a busy command center. People were working frantically to understand something that defied understanding. "There's one more thing," Chen said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "We found Frank." Morrison's heart stopped. "What do you mean, found him?" "He's been missing for 3 days. His neighbors reported strange lights coming from his house Tuesday night, then nothing. When we investigated, we found the place empty. No signs of struggle, no evidence of forced entry. But there were burn marks on the floor in perfect geometric patterns, and the electromagnetic readings were off the charts." The phone felt heavy in Morrison's hand. Frank had trusted him, confided in him after 40 years of silence, and now he was gone. "You think they took him?" "I think Frank knew more than he told you. His computer was wiped clean, but our techs found fragments of deleted files. He'd been researching the suspects from that night, trying to track what happened to them after their release. Morrison's mind raced. Did he find them? We think so, and we think they found him too. The weight of responsibility settled on Morrison's shoulders like a lead blanket. 40 years ago, Frank had made a choice to stay silent, to protect humanity from a truth it wasn't ready to face. Now that silence had been broken, and the consequences were spiraling beyond their control. "Send me the files," Morrison said finally. "All of them." "I already have. Check your secure email. The task force convenes tomorrow at 0800. We've set up operations at a classified facility outside the city." After Chen hung up, Morrison sat in the growing darkness of his basement, staring at the classified documents scattered before him. Somewhere out there, 17 people were discovering they weren't entirely human. Somewhere else, the original 3 suspects were still alive, still hiding, still carrying secrets that could reshape everything. And now Frank was gone, vanished into the same mystery that had haunted him for 4 decades. Morrison's computer chimed softly. The new files were arriving, each one a piece of a puzzle that seemed to grow larger and more terrifying with every revelation. The quiet suburban evening outside his window felt like the calm before an unimaginable storm. The basement of the abandoned warehouse felt like stepping into a tomb. Detective Sarah Chen's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing concrete walls lined with metal shelving units that stretched back into shadows. The air tasted of rust and something else, something organic that made her stomach clench. "Marcus, stay close," she whispered into her radio, "and keep that Geiger counter running." Behind her, Detective Rodriguez moved with practiced silence, his weapon drawn but lowered. They'd been partners for 6 years, but nothing had prepared them for this. Not the blood samples that defied classification, not the witness testimonies that read like science fiction, and certainly not the 40-year-old case file that had led them here. Chen's beam swept across a workbench covered in glass vials. Each one contained a viscous liquid that seemed to shift color as the light hit it, purple to green to something that looked almost silver. She'd seen similar samples in the lab photos from Detective Morrison's original case, the ones that had disappeared from evidence storage 3 decades ago. Sarah Rodriguez's voice was tight with tension. "Over here." She turned to find him standing before what looked like a medical examination table. Restraints hung from its edges, and dark stains covered the metal surface. But it was what lay beside the table that made her blood freeze, a collection of photographs scattered across the floor. Chen knelt and picked up the nearest image. It showed a person strapped to the table, but their skin appeared to be translucent, revealing a network of veins that pulsed with the same shifting colors as the liquid in the vials. Another photo showed the same subject, but now their features had changed completely. Different bone structure, different eye color, even different apparent age. "These are recent," Rodriguez said, examining the photo quality. "Digital prints may be taken within the last year." A metallic clang echoed from somewhere deeper in the basement. Both detectives froze, weapons raised. Chen killed her flashlight and they waited in the darkness, listening. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving across the floor above them. Chen's radio crackled to life, Morrison's voice barely a whisper. "They're here. Black SUVs, government plates. You need to get out now." But as Chen reached for her radio, another voice spoke from the darkness behind them. A voice that seemed to come from multiple directions at once. "Detective Chen. Detective Rodriguez, we've been expecting you." They spun around, flashlights blazing, but saw only empty air. The voice continued, seeming to emanate from the walls themselves. "You're looking at our work. 40 years of research, of understanding what your kind calls impossible. Detective Morrison was the first to see us as we truly are. He won't be the last." "Show yourself!" Rodriguez shouted, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. A figure stepped into their light, a woman in her 30s with pale skin and dark hair. But as Chen watched, the woman's features began to shift. Her eyes changed from brown to blue to something that looked almost golden. Her height seemed to fluctuate, her bone structure realigning itself like clay being molded by invisible hands. "We are not from your world, Detective Chen, but we have been here far longer than your species has existed. We are the original inhabitants of this planet." Chen's hand trembled as she kept her weapon trained on the shifting figure. "What do you want?" "To reclaim what was taken from us. Your ancestors drove us underground, forced us to hide, to adapt. But we have learned to mimic you perfectly. We have infiltrated your governments, your militaries, your law enforcement agencies." The figure smiled, and for a moment Chen saw not one face but dozens flickering in rapid succession. Men, women, different ages, different ethnicities. Detective Morrison understood the truth. That's why he kept our secret for 40 years. That's why he's helping us now. "Morrison's dead," Rodriguez said. "We saw the body. You saw what we wanted you to see, just as you've been seeing what we wanted you to see all along." "How do you think you found this place, Detective Chen? How do you think you discovered those files that were supposedly destroyed?" Chen's mind raced. The anonymous tip that had led them here, the security footage that had conveniently malfunctioned, the evidence that had been almost too easy to find. "You're saying Morrison is one of you?" "I'm saying that the line between us and them is far more blurred than you realize. We don't just mimic human appearance, Detective. We can become human at the cellular level. We can live among you for decades, even lifetimes, without detection." The footsteps above grew louder. Multiple sets now, moving with military precision. "Your backup is arriving," the figure said. "But can you be certain they're really here to help you? In a world where anyone could be us, where anyone could have been replaced, how do you know who to trust?" Chen's radio crackled again, but now she couldn't tell if the voice was Morrison's or someone else entirely. "Sarah, where are you? We're coming down." The figure stepped backward into the shadows, its form already beginning to dissolve. "Welcome to our world, Detective Chen. We hope you survive it." The drive to the abandoned Blackwater facility took us through increasingly desolate terrain. Marcus gripped the steering wheel while Sarah studied the satellite images on her tablet. I sat in the back, my old service weapon heavy in its shoulder holster, watching the landscape blur past. "Turn left at the next junction," Sarah instructed. "According to these records, the facility is about 2 miles down that access road." The road deteriorated quickly from cracked asphalt to gravel to dirt. Scrub brush pressed in from both sides, and I noticed tire tracks in the dust, recent ones. "We're not the first ones here," I observed. Marcus slowed the car. "Government plates? Can't tell. But someone's been using this road within the last few days." We crested a small hill, and the facility came into view. It wasn't what I'd expected. Instead of some high-tech complex, I saw a cluster of weathered concrete buildings surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. Most of the structures looked abandoned, but one building showed signs of recent activity: portable generators, fresh tire tracks, and what appeared to be temporary satellite dishes. "That's not on any of the historical records I found," Sarah whispered, pointing to the active building. Marcus parked behind a stand of scraggly trees. We approached on foot, keeping low. The main gate stood open, which seemed odd for a supposedly abandoned facility. Too convenient, too easy. As we got closer, I could hear the low hum of machinery and see lights in the windows of the occupied building. Through a gap in the fence, I spotted 3 black SUVs parked near the entrance. "Frank," Marcus grabbed my arm. "Look at the license plates." I squinted through my bifocals. Government plates, just as we'd suspected. But it was the figure emerging from the building that made my blood run cold. Agent Collins, the same agent who'd stonewalled me for decades, who'd made my life hell whenever I tried to dig deeper into that night 40 years ago. He looked older, grayer, but there was no mistaking that angular face and those cold eyes. "Son of a bitch," I muttered. Collins wasn't alone. 2 other agents flanked him, and they were escorting someone, a woman in a white lab coat who seemed to be arguing with them. Even from this distance, I could see her distress. "We need to get closer," Sarah whispered. "Too risky," Marcus countered. We should call for backup. Call who? I asked. We don't know who to trust anymore. The decision was made for us when the lab-coated woman broke free from her escorts and ran toward the fence. Collins barked an order, and one of the agents drew his weapon. Without thinking, I was moving. My old legs carried me faster than they had in years, muscle memory from 4 decades of police work taking over. I reached the fence just as the woman stumbled through a hole cut in the chain link. "Help me," she gasped, her accent definitely foreign, Eastern European, maybe Russian. "They're going to kill me." The agents were closing in. I drew my weapon, feeling the familiar weight settle into my hands. "Police, stay back!" Collins appeared at the fence line, his face twisted with rage and recognition. "Detective Morrison, you always were a stubborn bastard. It's former Detective Morrison. And you're trespassing on federal property, Collins." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Federal property? This place doesn't exist on any federal registry, Morrison. Just like those 3 suspects from 1983 never existed." The woman clutched my arm. "The children," she whispered urgently. "They have the children." My heart nearly stopped. "What children?" "The hybrid children. Generation 3. They're using them for—" A sharp crack echoed across the compound, and the woman jerked, then crumpled against me. Blood bloomed across her white coat. In the distance, I could see a sniper on one of the building rooftops. Marcus and Sarah reached us as Collins and his men advanced through the fence opening. We were outnumbered and outgunned, but I wasn't backing down. Not after 40 years of questions. Not when we were this close to answers. "The briefcase," the dying woman whispered, pressing something small and hard into my palm. "Locker 379, Union Station." Collins raised his weapon. "End of the line, Morrison. You should have stayed retired." But before he could fire, an explosion rocked the facility behind him. Alarms began blaring, and emergency lights bathed the compound in pulsing red. In the chaos that followed, I saw them. Small figures running from the burning building, moving with that same unsettling grace I remembered from that night in 1983. The children were real, and they were escaping. Collins spun around, shouting orders into his radio, momentarily forgetting about us. It was the break we needed. "Run," I told Marcus and Sarah, pocketing whatever the woman had given me. "Run, and don't look back." The laboratory's emergency lights cast everything in a hellish red glow as Detective Sarah Chen pressed her back against the overturned metal table. 30 yards away, the thing that had once been Dr. Marcus Holloway scraped its elongated fingers against the concrete floor, searching for them in the darkness. "How long do we have?" she whispered to Frank, who clutched the stolen DNA samples against his chest like a lifeline. "Maybe 10 minutes before the transformation completes," he breathed back, his weathered face grim. "After that, it won't just be hunting us, it'll be calling for the others." The scratching stopped. In the sudden silence, Sarah's heart hammered so loudly she was certain the creature would hear it. Frank's revelation about the true nature of the 1983 arrests had shattered everything she thought she knew about reality, but now wasn't the time for questions. Survival came first. A low harmonic hum filled the air, not quite sound, not quite vibration, but something that seemed to resonate in their bones. Frank's face went pale. "It's already started," he said. "The call." Sarah risked a glance around the edge of their makeshift shelter, where Dr. Holloway had been. Something else entirely now stood. The basic human shape remained, but stretched and distorted like a reflection in dark water. Its limbs had elongated grotesquely, and its skin held a translucent quality that revealed the alien architecture beneath, not bones and organs, but something that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. "The samples," Frank urged, pressing the vials into her hands. "You have to get these to someone who can expose the truth. The CDC, the military, anyone who'll listen. What about you?" Frank pulled out his service weapon, checking the chamber with practiced efficiency despite his trembling hands. "Someone needs to buy you time. Besides, I've been carrying this secret for 40 years. Maybe it's time I finally did something about it." The creature's head snapped toward them at the sound of Frank's voice. What had been Dr. Holloway's eyes were now multifaceted orbs that reflected the emergency lighting like broken mirrors. It moved with fluid grace, crossing the laboratory in seconds. Frank stepped out from behind their cover, weapon raised. "Hey, ugly, remember me?" The thing paused, its head tilting in an unnaturally precise motion. When it spoke, the voice carried harmonics that made Sarah's teeth ache. "Francis Murphy, badge number 4871. You should have remained silent." "Yeah, well, I was never good at following orders." Frank opened fire. The bullet struck the creature's torso, but instead of blood, a luminescent fluid sprayed from the wounds, fluid that seemed to move with purpose, already working to seal the damage. The thing didn't even stagger. Sarah used the distraction to sprint toward the laboratory's rear exit, the samples secure in her jacket pocket. Behind her, she heard Frank's weapon click empty, followed by a sound she'd never forget. Not quite a scream, not quite static, but something that conveyed pure agony across species barriers. She slammed through the exit door and into the building's rear corridor. The power was out here too, emergency lighting creating a maze of shadows. Her phone had no signal, whether from the building's shielding or something else, she couldn't tell. The harmonics started again, stronger now, coming from multiple directions. Frank had been right. The call was going out, and others were responding. Sarah's police training kicked in as she oriented herself toward the main exit. The building's layout was burned into her memory from their arrival, down this corridor, left at the junction, then straight to the lobby. But as she ran, she noticed something that made her blood freeze. The shadows were moving wrong. Not shifting with her flashlight beam, but moving independently, flowing along the walls like liquid darkness. And in that darkness, shapes were taking form. Human silhouettes that walked just out of phase with reality. She burst through the lobby doors and into the night air, expecting relief. Instead, she found a street that belonged in a nightmare. Every streetlight for blocks had failed, but the darkness wasn't empty. Figures stood motionless under dead lamps, their outlines wavering like heat mirages. More were emerging from buildings, from parked cars, from storm drains. How many of them were there? How long had they been here, living among humans, waiting for some signal she couldn't understand? Sarah's car sat 50 yards away, but the space between was filled with those impossible figures. She gripped the DNA samples tighter, Frank's words echoing in her mind. Someone had to know. Someone had to expose the truth. The harmonics reached a crescendo, and as one, every figure in the street turned toward her. Their faces were human, recognizable. The mailman from her neighborhood, a barista she'd seen that morning, even a fellow officer from her precinct. But their eyes held that same multifaceted gleam, and their movements carried an alien precision that no human body should possess. Sarah ran toward her car, knowing with absolute certainty that she was already too late. The fluorescent lights in the underground facility hummed with an intensity that made my teeth ache. Dr. Chen led us through a maze of corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly beneath what I now knew was a government complex disguised as a research hospital. Every step echoed off sterile walls lined with doors bearing cryptic numerical codes instead of names. "They're in here," Chen whispered, stopping before a reinforced steel door marked only with the numbers 2847. She pressed her palm against a scanner, and the heavy lock disengaged with a pneumatic hiss. The room beyond defied every expectation I'd harbored during the 40-year journey to this moment. Instead of cells or restraints, I found myself looking into what appeared to be a comfortable living space. Soft lighting, furniture that seemed almost organic in its curves, and three figures who turned toward us with expressions of profound sadness rather than surprise. I recognized them instantly, though they appeared unchanged from that night 4 decades ago. The same faces, the same builds, even the same clothes they'd worn during the arrest. Time had simply refused to touch them. "Detective Morrison," the woman spoke first, her voice carrying the same melodic quality I remembered. "We wondered if you would eventually find us." My hand instinctively moved toward where my service weapon once rested, then fell uselessly to my side. "You know why I'm here?" "Of course." The tall man stepped forward, and I noticed his movements held that same fluid grace that had seemed so unsettling during the interrogation. "You want answers about what we are, about why your world has been changing in ways your scientists cannot explain." Dr. Chen activated a recording device, her fingers trembling slightly. "Please state your names for the record." "Names are constructs your species uses to differentiate individuals," the shorter man replied. "We are what you might call aspects of a collective consciousness. But if labels provide comfort, you may continue using the designations from our arrest." "Sarah, Michael, David," I said, the names feeling strange on my tongue after so many years. "That's what you called yourselves then?" Sarah nodded. "We chose those identities to blend with your population while we conducted our study." "Study of what?" The question burst from me with more force than intended. "Your species' readiness for integration." Michael's words hung in the air like a death sentence. Earth was designated as a potential candidate for inclusion in what you might term a galactic community. We were sent to evaluate humanity's developmental stage. The room seemed to tilt around me. I gripped the back of a nearby chair, my knuckles white against the strange material. "And your conclusion?" David exchanged a look with his companions before answering. "Your arrest of us was actually fortuitous. It allowed us to observe your governmental and scientific institutions' responses to undeniable proof of non-terrestrial intelligence. The results were instructive." "The cover-up," Dr. Chen whispered. "The suppression of evidence, the threats against anyone who tried to go public." "Precisely," Sarah confirmed. "Your leaders chose secrecy over transparency, fear over curiosity, potential weapons applications over peaceful contact." My legs finally gave out, and I sank into the chair I'd been gripping. "So this whole time you've been prisoners because my government wanted to study you?" "Not prisoners," Michael corrected. "Observers. We remained here voluntarily to continue monitoring humanity's progress, or lack thereof." "The DNA results that started this whole mess," I said, pieces of a cosmic puzzle finally clicking into place. "What exactly were they?" Dr. Chen pulled up a holographic display that materialized in the center of the room. Genetic sequences rotated slowly in the air, beautiful and terrifying in their implications. "Not just non-human," she explained. "The sequences contained information encoded in ways that suggest intelligence beyond anything we've encountered. Mathematical constants, astronomical data, even what appears to be historical records of dozens of civilizations." "Your DNA is a library," I breathed. "Among other things," David acknowledged. "Each of us carries different aspects of our collective knowledge. It ensures preservation across time and space." "Why tell us this now?" I asked. "After 40 years of silence." Sarah's expression grew even more somber. "Because time is running short, the evaluation period is ending, and decisions must be made about Earth's future." "What kind of decisions?" "Your species stands at a crossroads," Michael explained. "Climate change, nuclear proliferation, artificial intelligence development without ethical frameworks. You're approaching technologies that could either elevate you to join the galactic community or destroy you entirely. And if we're found wanting?" The three beings exchanged another meaningful look. "Intervention becomes necessary," David said finally, "for the protection of both your world and others." Dr. Chen's recording device beeped softly, indicating storage limits reached, but I barely heard it over the roar of blood in my ears as the full implications crashed over me. We weren't just being evaluated, we were being judged, and from the expressions on these ancient faces, humanity's report card wasn't looking promising. "How long do we have?" I managed to ask. "The final assessment begins tomorrow," Sarah replied. "And, Detective Morrison, whether humanity passes or fails may well depend on what you choose to do with this information." The laboratory's emergency lighting cast everything in an eerie red glow, as Sarah Chen frantically transferred data files to her portable drive. Behind her, Detective Morrison kept watch at the door, while the distant sounds of boots on concrete grew closer. "How much longer?" Morrison whispered, his voice tight with tension. "Almost there," Sarah replied, her fingers dancing across the keyboard. The files contained everything: 40 years of genetic analysis, breeding program documentation, and most importantly, the current locations of every hybrid on Earth. Just need the encryption keys. A metallic clang echoed through the corridor outside. Morrison gripped his service weapon tighter, though he knew conventional bullets would be useless against what was coming for them. Dr. Elizabeth Kane's voice crackled through the facility's intercom system. "Detective Morrison, I know you're in there. You have no idea what you're interfering with. This program has prevented 3 potential wars and guided humanity through its most crucial evolutionary period." Sarah's drive beeped. Transfer complete. She yanked it from the computer and destroyed the hard drive with a specialized electromagnetic device. "Got it. Let's go." They moved toward the emergency exit, but Morrison stopped dead when he saw Frank Kowalski standing in the doorway. His former partner looked exactly the same as he had 20 years ago when Morrison thought he died in that warehouse fire. "Hello, Tom," Frank said, his voice carrying an otherworldly resonance. "I've missed our conversations." Morrison's hand trembled slightly. "You're one of them. You've been one of them this whole time. I was recruited after the fire. They offered me something better than death: purpose." Frank's appearance began to shift subtly, his features becoming more refined, almost ethereal. "Do you know why we chose you that night in 1983? It wasn't random, Tom. We needed someone incorruptible, someone who would keep the secret until the right moment." Sarah backed against the wall, clutching the data drive. "The hybrids aren't just observers. They're preparing for something." Frank nodded approvingly. "Integration. Humanity is approaching a technological singularity that will either elevate your species or destroy it. We're here to ensure the former." "By controlling us?" Morrison spat. "By infiltrating our governments, our institutions. By guiding you. Every major breakthrough in the past 4 decades, quantum computing, genetic therapy, sustainable energy, has had hybrid influence. We've prevented nuclear conflicts, environmental disasters, and social collapses that would have set your species back centuries." Through the facility's windows, Morrison could see lights appearing in the sky, not aircraft, but something far more advanced. The primary vessels were arriving. Dr. Kane's voice echoed again through the intercom. "The data you've stolen contains the identities of every hybrid operative. If that information is released, it will trigger a panic that could undo 40 years of careful progress. Millions will die in the chaos that follows." Morrison felt the weight of the decision crushing down on him. "So we're supposed to just trust you? Accept that humanity needs babysitters?" "Look around you, Tom," Frank said, gesturing to the advanced technology surrounding them. "Look at your climate change, your political divisions, your weapons of mass destruction. Do you really think your species would have survived this long without intervention?" Sarah suddenly spoke up. "The breeding program. It's not just about creating hybrids, is it? You're altering human DNA on a larger scale." Frank's expression grew serious. "Every generation becomes slightly more adaptable, more rational, more capable of long-term thinking. It's been happening gradually enough that no one noticed." "You're evolving us," Morrison realized with horror, "without our consent." "Would you have consented to survival?" Frank asked. "Would your governments have agreed to the necessary changes if they knew the true cost of maintaining your current trajectory?" The lights in the sky were growing brighter, and Morrison could feel a subtle vibration in the air, something massive approaching. Through the laboratory's sophisticated instruments, Sarah detected energy readings unlike anything in human technology. "The reveal isn't accidental, is it?" Morrison asked. "This whole situation, my decision to speak out, the investigation, even finding this facility, it's all part of your plan." Frank smiled sadly. "You were always perceptive. Humanity has reached the point where we can begin open contact. But it needs to happen gradually, with trusted voices like yours leading the transition. Morrison looked at the data drive in Sarah's hand, then at his former partner, who was no longer entirely human. And if I refuse, if I release everything? Then we adapt to a more direct approach. But Tom, I've known you for 20 years. You became a police officer because you wanted to protect people. This is just protection on a larger scale. The vibration intensified, and through the windows they could see a massive structure descending through the clouds, beautiful and terrifying in its obvious alien origin. Choose quickly, Frank said gently, because ready or not, the next phase begins tonight. The laboratory had become a fortress of secrets, but now those walls were crumbling. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood before the massive display screen, her fingers trembling as she pulled up the final sequence analysis. Behind her, Detective Sarah Chen watched in stunned silence while I gripped the edge of the steel table, my knuckles white with 40 years of suppressed truth finally breaking free. "The temporal markers are undeniable," Elena whispered, her voice barely audible over the humming equipment. "The DNA degradation patterns, the cellular structures, these samples are ancient. Not just decades, Frank. We're talking millennia." The room spun around me as memories crashed back like a tidal wave. That night in 1983, the way their eyes had seemed to hold depths I couldn't fathom, the strange calm that had settled over them when the handcuffs clicked shut, the words one of them had spoken in that otherworldly language that had haunted my dreams ever since. "There's more," Elena continued, her cursor dancing across genetic sequences that defied everything we thought we knew. The accelerated healing, the enhanced cognitive capacity, the resistance to cellular aging, it's all encoded here. But it's not random mutation, it's deliberate, engineered. Sarah stepped closer to the screen, her badge catching the blue glow of the monitors. Engineered by whom? And why? I knew the answer before Elena spoke it, had known it for 40 years, buried deep beneath layers of denial and rationalization. The truth I'd carried like a cancer in my chest, eating away at everything I thought I understood about reality. "By themselves," Elena said. "This is selective evolution on a scale we've never seen. They've been modifying their own genetic structure for thousands of years, adapting, improving, preparing. Preparing for what?" Sarah's voice cracked slightly. The laboratory door burst open, and Agent Morrison strode in with 3 armed men behind him. His face was a mask of cold determination, but I could see the fear lurking behind his eyes, the same fear that had driven the cover-up, the disappearances, the 40 years of silence. "Dr. Vasquez, step away from the computer," Morrison commanded, his weapon drawn. "This research is classified beyond your clearance level." But Elena didn't move. Her eyes were fixed on the screen, on data that was rewriting human history in real time. "Oh my God, Frank, do you understand what this means? They're not just visitors. They're not invaders. They're our predecessors," I finished, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "The original human template." Morrison's face went pale. "Shut it down. Now." "The genetic markers are too close to baseline human to be coincidence," Elena continued, ignoring the weapons trained on her. "But they're refined, perfected. Like someone took our species and stripped away all the flaws, all the limitations." Sarah was backing toward the emergency exit, her hand on her radio. "I'm calling this in. The public has a right to know." "The public has a right to survive," Morrison snapped. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, what we've been protecting you from." I laughed, a bitter sound that echoed off the sterile walls. "Protecting? You mean hiding? Like you hid them after that night, like you hid the truth about what they really are." "What happened to them, Frank?" Elena asked, her fingers still flying across the keyboard, downloading everything she could before Morrison's men reached her. "Where are they now?" The question I'd been dreading, the final piece of the puzzle that would complete the picture of our world's true nature. I closed my eyes, seeing their faces again, patient, knowing, waiting. They were never prisoners, I said quietly. They came willingly. The arrest, the detention, it was all theatre, a way to get inside, to study us as we studied them, to understand how far we'd fallen. Morrison was shouting orders, but his words seemed to come from a great distance. The truth was a living thing now, unstoppable and terrible in its implications. They're still here, I continued, watching, waiting, deciding whether we're worth saving or if it's time to start over. The lights flickered, and for a moment the displays went dark. When they came back online, new data was streaming across the screens, real-time genetic scans from across the globe, thousands of signatures, tens of thousands. Elena's breath caught. They're everywhere. The facility's emergency alarms began to wail, and I realized with crystalline clarity that our 40 years of borrowed time had just run out. Whatever decision they'd been deliberating, whatever judgment they'd been preparing, the moment of revelation had finally arrived, and we were about to discover whether humanity deserved a future. The laboratory fell silent except for the hum of equipment and my own ragged breathing. Dr. Sarah Chen stood frozen at her workstation, the genetic sequences results glowing on multiple screens around us. 40 years of secrets hung in the air between us like a poisonous fog. "You knew," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "All this time, you knew what they were." I nodded slowly, feeling every one of my 73 years weighing on my shoulders. I knew they weren't entirely human, but I never understood the full scope until tonight. The DNA analysis painted a picture that defied everything we thought we knew about human evolution. The 3 suspects I'd arrested that night in 1983, Michael Torres, Elena Vasquez, and David Kim, carried genetic markers that shouldn't exist, sequences that suggested hybridization with something else, something not of this world. The missing persons reports, Chen said, scrolling through decades of data. They all match the same pattern, people disappearing near electromagnetic anomalies, then returning months later with gaps in their memory and subtle behavioral changes. I thought about Torres, how he'd moved with that unsettling grace, how his eyes seemed to catch light differently than human eyes should, about Vasquez's impossible knowledge of the crime scene details she couldn't have known, about Kim's eerie calm as he'd stared through the interrogation room window at something none of us could see. "The government buried it," I said. 3 days after their arrest, federal agents showed up, classified everything under national security. I was ordered to destroy my reports and never speak of what I'd witnessed. Chen pulled up satellite imagery from the past 4 decades, overlaying it with the disappearance data. A pattern emerged that made my blood run cold. The incidents weren't random, they formed a grid, marking specific locations across the globe with mathematical precision. "They're mapping something," she breathed. "Or maybe preparing for something." The laboratory door burst open. Agent Morrison strode in, flanked by 3 armed operatives in black tactical gear. His face was grim, and I could see the weight of dangerous knowledge in his eyes. "Detective Walsh, Dr. Chen, step away from the computers." "So you're part of it," I said, my hand instinctively moving toward the service weapon I no longer carried. "How long have you known?" Morrison's expression softened slightly. "Longer than you might think. The organization I work for has been monitoring this situation since 1962. What you discovered 40 years ago was just the beginning." Chen's fingers flew over her keyboard, trying to download the data before they could stop her. "The public has a right to know. These beings, they're changing people, altering human DNA. We don't even know their ultimate purpose." "Their purpose," Morrison said quietly, "is survival, just like ours." He gestured to one of his operatives, who produced a tablet displaying classified files, images of similar genetic anomalies dating back decades, reports from law enforcement agencies worldwide describing encounters with individuals who seemed human but weren't quite right. "Their world is dying," Morrison continued. "Has been for millennia. They've been coming here in small numbers, carefully integrating themselves into our population. The hybridization isn't an invasion, it's an adaptation. They need us as much as we need to understand them. And you've been covering it up all this time? My voice cracked with anger and disbelief. We've been managing first contact, preventing panic, ensuring that, when the time comes for full disclosure, humanity will be ready. Morrison's eyes met mine. That time is now. The environmental degradation of their homeworld has reached critical levels. The small-scale integration phase is ending. The implications hit me like a physical blow. How many more are coming? Enough to change everything. He paused, weighing his words carefully. Within the next 5 years, the hidden population will reveal themselves. The genetic modifications they've made to their human partners will become apparent in the next generation. Children who can process radiation, who require less oxygen, who can survive in conditions that would kill normal humans. Chen looked up from her computer, face pale. The climate change projections. If Earth's environment continues deteriorating at current rates, then their adaptations become advantages, Morrison finished, and cooperation becomes our only chance for species survival. I thought about my own grandchildren, wondered if any of them carried those impossible genetic markers, wondered if humanity as we knew it was already ending, transforming into something new whether we wanted it or not. What happens to people like me? I asked. The ones who know the truth? Morrison holstered his weapon, a gesture that seemed almost symbolic. You help us prepare the world for what's coming. You tell your story, Detective Walsh, all of it, because 40 years of silence ends tonight. Through the laboratory windows, I could see the first hints of dawn breaking over the horizon. A new day was coming, bringing with it truths that would reshape everything humanity thought it knew about its place in the universe. The age of secrets was finally over.